If imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, then Jazzpunk feels like a fan homage to Gravity Bone and 30 Flights of Loving. I really don't know and can't tell if these two games are so similar because of imitation or because of overlapping developer styles, but according to interviews, Luis Hernandez was completely unaware of Brendan Chung's games and was terrified to discover just how similar they looked. But 30 Flights of Loving came out almost 2 years ago, and Jazzpunk came out today. Like 30 Flights of Loving, Jazzpunk is a colorful, 60s-themed retro espionage adventure with an often random and nonsensical sense of humor. Like 30 Flights of Loving, Jazzpunk uses stylistically animated, blocky, symbolic character models. And unlike 30 Flights, Jazzpunk is not 15 minutes long. It's more like 2 or 3 hours. And I guess it does have its own style after all. Jazzpunk is a wild stream of consciousness splurge of random humor and unpredictable gags. If 30 Flights of Loving is an offbeat drama, then Jazzpunk is an offbeat comedy. So at least it has that going for it. Wait. No, that was bad. I should be reviewing the game on its own merits, right? Jazzpunk is a first-person, non-combat comedy-adventure game in which the player spies his way through a trippy and surreal mission. The game is divided into several levels with a few objectives and puzzles in each one, but most of the gameplay actually involves the little distractions found in, around, and behind your mission objectives. Scattered throughout everywhere in the game are NPCs who crack jokes. And I guess the reason why I didn't find those jokes very entertaining is because I'm not a fan of this kind of humor. It's cheap, it's juvenile and silly. It's closer to Saints Row than Stanley Parable. It makes up for a lack of cleverness with sheer volume instead. Jokes are everywhere. There are so many of them that, statistically speaking, at least a few of them might make you laugh. But for me, most of them made me kinda cringe.
Dude, that was nano-tubular.
I got some upcoming gigs. Almost a terabyte.
Most of the jokes in Jazzpunk are puns. Some of the jokes are references, and some of them are non-sequitur sight gags that come so far out of the blue that they're supposed to be funny just by virtue of being silly.
Yes, my lord.
Luptar. Sudsum.
LOL, so random, right, guys? There are so many things like that in this game, and they're all over the place. And most of them are puns. Jazzpunk relishes in cheap puns. Instead of quickly tossing them out for cutaway humor, it creates entire playable mini-games out of them, and virtually half of all the dialogue is just one bad pun after another. Jazzpunk was designed and playtested to make sure that a constant jokes per minute was being maintained throughout, and thus quality has been sacrificed for quantity. It's a nonsensical, Dadaist stream of consciousness deluge of jokes that don't make sense because stylistically speaking, they don't have to. And that's the problem I found with it. The jokes fell flat. Stream of consciousness is not very satisfying if the stuff being streamed has little to no value. It works better as a style rather than an actual working methodology. Unless you're like Jack Kerouac or James Joyce, it's not going to be that easy to get away with this stuff. And hell, even then, it's not like On the Road didn't have an editor. In Jazzpunk, the editor is the villain. That's how much contempt this game has towards the idea of restraining itself. And since it's not restraining itself, and since the bread and butter of its humor is puns and references, it actually spends more time acknowledging the existence of something else rather than trying to be creative on its own. And when you don't know the reference of a referential joke, it's hard to tell what's supposed to be a joke and what's not. Nothing is truly original. 30 Flights of Loving is also a patchwork of references, and they're subtle. You don't notice them because they're deconstructed down to a point where they're almost unrecognizable. Once you're working only with the very basic skeleton of the ideas that make up the other works that you think are cool, then you can do something creative with it by yourself. Otherwise, you end up making something that's more derivative than it is inspired. Wait, no, I have to review the game on its own merits. I did not find most of Jazzpunk's jokes to be funny, and those jokes are really all it has going for it. It delivers one after another at a pace so aggressively fast that it forgets to trim the bad jokes from the good jokes. But maybe trying to make that judgment is my problem. I also never really liked the 80s spoof movies that Jazzpunk evokes. Maybe a lot of this review's negativity just boils down to my own personal preferences in comedy, but the game doesn't really have engaging gameplay or any features outside of that comedy. And after the second playthrough, its charm still didn't grow on me. And it's $15, so what value does it have to me? I don't know. Jazzpunk is not for everyone. It may be for some people, but it was clearly not for me.
Everything anyone says in this movie makes no sense, so I have to keep up here, okay?